PR ended the press conference instead of talking to Outkick.
I think there's always going to be outside noise, but I think we've been professionals long enough to know that if you let that affect you, then you're not really here for the right things. And so for us, we just keep the main thing, and that's hoops.
You're speaking of that outside noise, Sophie, your teammate. Sophie came out with
Oh, thank you. Have a good day.
Watch that moment carefully. The Indiana Fever just ended their own press conference because the wrong reporter tried to ask a question. Not a hostile reporter, not someone screaming accusations. Just a credentialed media member from Outkick, asking about a teammate's comments. And in that single decision, the Fever created exactly the kind of controversy they were trying to avoid. This is the WNBA in May 2025. A league that spent decades begging for mainstream attention, now actively rejecting it when it doesn't come from pre-approved sources.
And this is Stephanie White. I think this might have been before the game, actually. The Fever coach Stephanie White has asked her stance on males playing in women's sports.
What's your stance? What is your stance on men or athletes who test as biological male participating in women's sports? What's your personal stance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I'm educated enough from a scientific standpoint. I don't ever believe that exclusion is an answer. I just don't. I do think, when we think about various levels of sport, various governing bodies of sport and things that go into that, like I said, I'm not educated enough at the different levels.
Here's what makes this significant. Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever's head coach, was asked a straightforward question about biological males in women's sports. Not a gotcha question, not a trap, just a policy question that every major sports league has had to address in the past 3 years. Her answer? She can't scientifically identify the difference between a man and a woman. Those were her actual words. The same response Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson gave during her confirmation hearings in March 2022, when asked to define what a woman is. But here's the problem. Stephanie White coaches in a league that exists specifically because biological sex creates different athletic categories. The WNBA's entire business model depends on the premise that women's basketball is a distinct category worth preserving and promoting.
I know growing up, I played with the boys all the time.
So
there weren't girl sports.
Would you welcome a biological male in WNBA?
Again, it's like, I don't know, when we talk about biological male and scientifically where we are, I think it's a totally different scenario. As I said, I'm not educated enough in terms of transgender and transitioning to give you a smart answer. I would say, though, that I just don't feel like exclusion is an answer, and I think that we need to have deeper, more layered conversations.
And you'd be okay with them in the locker room?
Yeah. Is there any frustration, because you guys are in a really fantastic run, that this is distracting from that?
There is a frustration, of course, because we want to talk about basketball, and we want to continue to work on our game, and we want to continue to grow as a team. But I also understand, like, this is part of our growth edge as a league, right? It's part of our growth edge as a league, and we have to be able to manage. We have to be able to insulate as much as we can, and then we have to be able to lead with conversation.
Now listen to this next part. White says she doesn't believe in exclusion as an answer. But exclusion is literally how sports categories work. That's not controversial. That's basic sports administration. Olympians are excluded from Paralympics. 18-year-olds are excluded from 12 and under leagues. Heavyweight boxers are excluded from featherweight divisions. Professional athletes are excluded from college sports. Every single competitive category exists to exclude someone. The WNBA itself excludes men. That's the entire point. So when White says exclusion is never the answer, she's either being deliberately evasive or she hasn't thought through the logical implications of her own statement.
Alex Samara.
What's your stance on athletes who are biologically male participating in women's sports?
Yeah, I mean, my focus as a basketball coach, I be completely honest, like I don't think I've ever had to think about that. I'm completely supportive of people from all communities, all walks of life. So that's my stance completely.
And it's not just the Fever. Portland Fire coach Alex Samara got the same question about biological males in women's sports. Watch how he handles it. Complete dodge. I'm supportive of everyone in the community is a non-answer. The reporter asked a specific policy question. Would you be okay with biological males participating in the WNBA? Samara refused to engage with the actual question. This is becoming a pattern. WNBA coaches and executives have clearly been media trained to avoid giving direct answers on this topic, which is their right. But that evasiveness comes with consequences.
All right, so we're here at it's the Fever and the Fire game at the Moda Center, and these young women showed up to do what?
We showed up today here in support of Sophie Cunningham and her stance on biological men in women's sports, and being the first professional athlete to stand up and say that she doesn't think it's fair, and do it in a very respectful, kind, and loving way. So we're here to support her.
Awesome.
We're here to support Sophie in keeping women's sports about women and girls.
Because while coaches are dodging questions and PR teams are shutting down press conferences, players are taking actual positions. And those positions are resonating with audiences in ways the league didn't anticipate. Sophie Cunningham of the Phoenix Mercury became the first active WNBA player to publicly state that biological males shouldn't compete in women's sports. She said it respectfully, she said it clearly, and she said it knowing there would be backlash. The reaction was immediate. Portland fans booed her during warm-ups at the Moda Center. But something else happened too. A completely new fan base showed up to support her.
Bravo. Bravo. The league is a mess. You're shutting actual news outlets down. Indiana Fever PR. Wow. Isn't that the point of growing the league? So you get coverage from places you're not used to seeing prior. I mean, the fact that Outkick is there obviously means the audience has stretched out in some kind of way. We want to grow, but we only want to grow with a specific portion of people. It's not going to work like that. You obviously have a superstar in your league, and yeah, Sophie's a superstar now, who is resonating with a completely new...
Those young women traveled to Portland specifically to support Sophie Cunningham's stance on women's sports. They're not traditional WNBA fans. They're part of a growing movement focused on preserving female-only spaces in athletics. And they just became WNBA ticket buyers. This is what growth looks like in professional sports. You attract new audiences. You expand beyond your core demographic. You bring in people who weren't previously engaged with your product. The WNBA spent 28 years struggling to build a sustainable audience. Now they have multiple fan bases emerging organically around different players and different issues. Caitlin Clark brought in basketball purists and Iowa fans. Angel Reese brought in a different demographic. And now Sophie Cunningham is attracting people who care about women's sports policy. That's 3 distinct growth opportunities. 3 separate paths to expanding the league's reach and revenue.
All right, Black and White sports supporters. Well, my goodness, the WNBA cannot stay out of their own way, and they will gripe about people making videos about this when you literally created this controversy yourself. We've got Stephanie White making comments about the fact that she can't scientifically identify the difference between a man and a woman. That's real. We got the Portland Fire coach also making comments. We got girls from Sophie's rally, the rally supporting Sophie Cunningham, making comments, but that's not where we're going to start. We got the Indiana Fever creating yet another controversy besides what Stephanie White said last night.
But instead of embracing that growth, the league keeps creating these self-inflicted controversies. The Fever shutting down a press conference because Outkick asked a question. Coaches giving evasive non-answers to straightforward policy questions. Teams trying to control which media outlets get access to players. And then they wonder why people make videos analyzing these decisions. The host here is absolutely right. The WNBA created this controversy themselves. Nobody forced Stephanie White to give that answer. Nobody made the Fever's PR team end that press conference. These were choices, and choices have consequences. Here's what the league doesn't seem to understand. When you shut down a reporter from a major sports media outlet owned by Fox, you're not protecting your players. You're creating a story about media access and institutional control. You're turning a question about one player's comments into a broader narrative about whether the WNBA can handle mainstream scrutiny.
Okay, so she said it's part of a growing league, but we have to be able to insulate. So are you not welcoming people into your league that have differing views? Point of fact, this coach herself came out and said, no, I don't want you as coach. By the way, you can tell. You notice she hasn't come out and said, if you're not in blah, 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 I don't think exclusion's the answer. But she's not pushing fans away anymore either, which I think is rather interesting. I'm not giving her any credit at all, because what do you mean by science? He asked you point blank, biological males should be allowed in the WNBA, yes or no? You gave a bullshit coward answer. A cowardly answer. It's crazy. We want to grow.
Listen to how Stephanie White frames this. She calls it part of our growth edge as a league and says they need to insulate while also having conversations. But you can't have both. You can't simultaneously grow your audience and insulate from perspectives you find uncomfortable. Growth means exposure to people who don't already agree with you. It means fans with different political views, different cultural backgrounds, different opinions on social issues. The NBA figured this out decades ago. They have fans across the entire political spectrum. Conservatives and liberals both watch NBA games. They might disagree about anthem protests or social justice messaging, but they still show up for the basketball. The WNBA seems to want growth, but only from specific demographics. They want new fans, but only if those fans share their institutional values. That's not how you build a major professional sports league. That's how you maintain a niche product. And notice what White said. We have to be able to insulate. Insulate from what? From fans who disagree with league positions on social issues? From media outlets that aren't part of the traditional WNBA press corps? From questions that don't fit the approved narrative? If the answer is yes to any of those, then the WNBA isn't actually interested in mainstream growth. They're interested in controlled growth within acceptable parameters. And that's a fundamentally different business model. So let's talk about what actually happened here and why it matters for the future of this league. The Indiana Fever are coming off one of their best stretches of the season. They're winning games. Caitlin Clark just posted a triple-double. The team is generating legitimate basketball storylines that should be the focus of media coverage. Instead, they're dealing with a controversy about media access that they created themselves. Outkick is a major sports media outlet. They cover the NFL, NBA, college football, college basketball. They have millions of readers and viewers. They're exactly the kind of mainstream platform the WNBA should want covering their games. More exposure, more audience, more potential fans. But when an Outkick reporter asked a question about Sophie Cunningham's comments on biological males in sports, the Fever's PR team shut it down. Not because the question was inappropriate, not because it violated any media guidelines, but because they didn't like the topic or the outlet. That decision reveals something important about how the WNBA views its relationship with media and fans. They want coverage, but only on their terms. They want attention, but only from approved sources. They want growth, but only from demographics they're comfortable with. Compare that to how other professional leagues handle controversial questions. NBA coaches get asked about China, about social justice, about political donations. NFL coaches get asked about national anthem protests, about player activism, about league policies. They might give diplomatic answers, they might deflect, but they don't end press conferences because someone asked a difficult question. The WNBA is operating like a protected institution that can afford to be selective about media access. But that's not their reality. They're still a subsidized league that loses money every year. They're still dependent on NBA revenue sharing. They're still fighting for television ratings and ticket sales. When you're in that position, you don't get to be precious about which media outlets cover you. You take the exposure and you deal with the questions that come with it. Here's the other issue. Caitlin Clark didn't come out for media availability after posting a triple-double. That's notable. The biggest star in the league, having one of her best statistical performances of the season, and she's not available to talk about it. Why? What happened that made the team decide to skip the standard post-game media session? We don't know, because the Fever isn't saying. But the optics are terrible. It looks like they're hiding their star player from questions. It looks like they're more concerned with controlling the narrative than with promoting their product. And that gets to the fundamental tension here. Stephanie White said they want to talk about basketball and grow as a team. But then she also said they need to insulate and manage the conversation. Those goals are in direct conflict. If you want to talk about basketball, you make your players available to media. You answer questions about the game. You engage with reporters, even when they're from outlets you don't traditionally work with. If you want to insulate and control the narrative, you shut down press conferences and limit media access. But then you can't complain when people talk about media access instead of basketball. The Fever chose the second option, and now instead of coverage about Caitlin Clark's triple-double, they're dealing with stories about censorship and institutional control. Think about the position this puts Caitlin in. She's the face of the league. She's brought unprecedented attention to the WNBA. Her games are drawing television ratings that the league hasn't seen in years. And now her team is creating controversies that overshadow her on-court performance. That's not protecting your star. That's undermining her. And here's what makes it even more frustrating. Sophie Cunningham's comments about women's sports weren't inflammatory. She didn't attack anyone. She didn't use offensive language. She simply stated her position that biological males shouldn't compete in women's sports. That's a position held by a significant portion of the American public, including many people who support LGBTQ rights in other contexts. By treating that position as unspeakable, by shutting down questions about it, the WNBA is telling a large segment of potential fans that their views aren't welcome. Not that they're wrong, not that there's room for debate, but that the topic itself is off limits. That's a choice, and it's a choice that has business consequences. Because those fans who showed up in Portland to support Sophie Cunningham, they bought tickets. They're engaging with WNBA content. They're potential long-term customers. But if the league signals that people with their views aren't welcome, they'll take their money elsewhere. The WNBA is now dealing with the same tension every major institution faces in contemporary America. Do you prioritize ideological consistency, or do you prioritize growth? Do you maintain strict positions on social issues, or do you create space for people who disagree? There's no easy answer, but there is a business reality. Professional sports leagues that have thrived have generally chosen inclusion over exclusion. They've found ways to welcome fans across the political spectrum. They've created environments where people with different views can still come together around the game. The WNBA seems to be choosing a different path, and maybe that works for them. Maybe they can build a sustainable business model around a more ideologically homogeneous fan base. But they should be honest about that choice instead of simultaneously claiming they want mainstream growth while rejecting mainstream media access. So where does this leave us? The WNBA has gone from one superstar in Caitlin Clark to potentially two superstars, with Sophie Cunningham attracting a completely new audience. That should be celebrated. That's exactly what a growing league looks like. Multiple players with different appeals bringing in different fan bases. But instead of embracing that growth, the league is creating unnecessary controversies about media access and acceptable questions. They're putting coaches in positions where they have to give evasive answers to straightforward questions. They're shutting down press conferences when reporters ask about topics the league would rather avoid. And the cost of all this? Instead of talking about basketball, we're talking about institutional control. Instead of analyzing Caitlin Clark's triple-double, we're analyzing why she wasn't available to media. Instead of celebrating the Fever's winning streak, we're debating whether Outkick should have been allowed to ask their question. The WNBA created all of this, every bit of it, and until they decide whether they actually want mainstream growth with all the complications that brings, or whether they want to remain a niche product with controlled messaging, these controversies are going to keep happening. So what do you think? Is the WNBA right to control media access this tightly, or are they shooting themselves in the foot by rejecting mainstream coverage? Can you build a major professional sports league while excluding media outlets and fan perspectives you disagree with? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's see if the league learns anything from this mess.